Hi, News Writing class. This is the first in a series of screencasts of no more than 15 minutes each, dealing with this last segment, our last 2 weeks on the law and ethics, and law specifically libel and invasion of privacy. When I was in college, I took a seminar from a professor who had been an engineer in an earlier career. And as such, he often used engineering terms to illustrate his points. And the one I remember the most is overarching and undergirding. And what that means is, for example, when you're building a structure, an office tower or a bridge, you want to give it as much stability as possible. And so, a check and balance of stability. So you overarch it and you undergird it. So it's balanced at the top and at the bottom as well. Well, I think of journalism as needing stability. It's a process that requires stability because it's very easy to do things that might be considered illegal or unethical if you don't have some guidelines. So for us, overarching is the law and undergirding is the ethics. Because remember, news is not only a product for sale, it's a business, but it's also a state of mind. That information impacts people. It creates a view of reality upon which they act. And acting means making choices, and that means getting consequences, good or bad, for those choices. So whatever choices you want to make it on as accurate of information, as clear a view of reality as possible. And so the public trusts the news media to be credible, to be accurate, fair, and balanced. And these two, the ceiling and the foundation, give us those boundaries to stay within. If I breach the law, if I invade somebody's privacy, or if I libel them, they could sue me. If they win, they could win a large amount of money. It may not be enough to put me out of business immediately, but it means I have that less operating capital to compete in a very highly competitive market. So I may not be able to do the things that my rivals can do because I don't have the cash. And that might mean that my readers or my viewers will go to my competitors because they'll get more for their investment of time there. And when they go, so do the businesses, and they take their advertising dollars with them. So ultimately, it could create a downward spiral where I will be out of business. Now, ethics, it's not illegal. You may not, there's not going to be any lawsuit or sum of money involved in it. But if you're printing unethical material, again, remember, people are considering in here that we're giving them as credible, as accurate, fair, and balanced view of reality as we possibly can. And they're depending upon that. And if we're doing things that are unethical, that breaches the trust, and they go away, and the businesses with their advertising dollars follow them. So we have the same impact. So both of these are very important to keep us grounded, to give us these boundaries. There's some things that are unethical that are not illegal. For example, lying is not illegal in and of itself. It depends on what it results in, but on face value, lying is not illegal, but it's certainly considered unethical. And who's going to consider you credible and trustworthy if you're a liar? Poking fun at somebody, they have a misfortune that seems could a little bit of morgue humor maybe, and the reader might laugh at the way you present it, but in the back of their minds, they're thinking, that could be me next time. I could be the one that receives this unfortunate action and be made fun of. So that drops their ethical expectation of you a bit. Taking photos of dead bodies, depending on what kind of a medium you have, could be considered unethical, because the smaller the community, the more likely people know each other, and it could be very shocking to see somebody that they know lying dead. If let's say that you're at an airport to cover that a commercial plane has gone down, and you happen to be standing there when somebody gets the word that their loved one has died, that nobody survived this crash, and they go into, they're crying and they're screaming and they're writhing on the floor, and a TV camera or a photographer is there and takes pictures of that. Is that news, or is that an invasion of privacy? Some people argue that it is news. It rivets the grief of this event. Other people say no, it's an invasion of privacy. So we have that. We have other issues too, such as fair trial and free press. So, for example, an individual has a right to a fair trial, to have as unbiased jury members as possible. But on the other hand, as the public, we have a right to know what's going on. Trials are public forums and involving public documents. And the bigger the event, the more we have a right to, think of O.J. Simpson trial, probably the biggest trial of the century, or certainly of its decade. And we have a right to know what's going on, but O.J. Simpson also has a right as an individual to have a fair trial. So we have to balance the news coverage with the person's right to have a fair trial. And if you think of that balancing, if you think of the right to be left alone and the public's right to know as the left and right seats of a teeter-totter, and where you sit on that teeter-totter depends on what your right is. If you're a private citizen, you're sitting on the left side, and it gives greater weight to your right to be left alone. If you're a public figure, you're a public official, you have less right to be left alone, and the public has more right to know about you and what you're doing. A public figure might be a person or a group of people who gather on the steps of the state legislature to protest something. They have their signs, they have their bullhorns, and they've called the news media, hoping that the resulting publicity could influence the outcome of this issue of public interest. And a public official doesn't even have to worry about influencing. The public official can simply pass a law or pass a public policy. So we have a right to know what they're doing, because it impacts us. So again, think of it as a teeter-totter. Where you sit here depends on which right you have to know. But it's a balancing act that the courts have to use, and it all comes down to really the First Amendment. Let me switch over to this other document here. The First Amendment: the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Take a breath. That's a big mouthful, but what we're really interested in is this part. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. Wow. That's pretty sweeping in its scope. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or the press. So does that mean freedom of speech? I could stand up in a crowded theater and just for giggles yell, "He's got a gun, look out!" and not suffer any consequences from the resulting stampede? No, we have a law. One, reckless endangerment, another one, inciting to riot. The press, do we have a right to print national security secrets? Do we have the right to print child pornography? Do we have the right to take other people's work and publish it as our own? No, we have laws there too. We have laws against erotic materials sold to minors, child pornography, obscenity, libel and slander, perjury, reckless endangerment, inciting to riot, invasion of privacy, national security secrets, copyright laws, insider trading, deceptive advertising. So how do we get back to this Congress shall make no law? Well, it comes back down again to what has the greater harm. If I don't print this material, actually, let me back up for a second. We're a democracy. And the reason we have freedom of the press is because we want our democracy to be informed of what's going on so you can make an informed decision when it comes time to vote. So we need a full marketplace of ideas. So we look at the balancing act on one, what creates the greater harm? Is there greater harm if I publish this material, or is there greater harm if I keep this material out of the marketplace of ideas so people don't have access to it? Well, in the case of child pornography, that's a pretty easy call. It creates a great harm to children if I ban child pornography and it doesn't get into the marketplace of ideas. Does it create a harm to the marketplace of ideas? And most people would say no. Child pornography does not add anything to the public discourse, to an informed democracy, to the marketplace of ideas. In fact, we get around Congress shall pass no law by simply declaring it not to be speech. It has no value to the public discourse. And the same thing with these others. They create greater harm than they add to the marketplace of ideas. So that's the balancing act. The reason that this is so vague is because the founding fathers purposely made it so. They never intended to get this specific. When they gathered at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to decide what were we going to be now that the British were gone, were we going to be 13 individual nations? Were we going to be 13 independent states acting in a loose confederation? Or were we going to be a nation? Well, as you know, they decided on a nation. But a nation needs a central government, needs a central administration. And so they created the central government, created of a presidency, a Congress, and a Supreme Court. People were suspicious of this. Remember, we just came out of a long and bloody revolution to get rid of an abusive central government called the British Parliament, where they were telling us what we couldn't do and what we had to do. And now suddenly we're looking at a document that creates a new central power, a central government, and people are suspicious. They're saying, are we giving away one central government just to get another one? And the founding fathers argued, and they said, look, whatever is in this document, that's the sole source of power for the central government. If it's not specified in this document, it does not belong to the central government. It belongs to the states to decide. And this is where we get this age-old thing of states' rights versus federal rights. And people said, oh, okay, well, would you mind putting that in writing? And so they went back to the Constitutional Convention another 6 months and came out with these 10 amendments, which we now today call, you're right, the Bill of Rights, to guarantee that Congress, the central government, will not have the power to do this, 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 or this. Well, since then, through a variety of Supreme Court cases, we have extended this vague First Amendment to all government, state, regional, county, local, federal, but we are dealing with a vague document, a vague statement that we have to constantly go back to the Supreme Court to do this balancing act. So that's where we're at when we start our segment on, we'll start with libel, the heart of which is defamation. That'll be segment 2.